Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilbin is the name and Hearthstone is the game, and this is part 18 of my Kobolds and Catacombs card review, the final piece of the review puzzle. I have a ton of new cards. The card dump hit. I've got a lot of cards left to review, and that means I'm going to be moving at a lightning speed in this video. That said, I'll still have some quick reviews at the end of the video you can find in the description below. But for now, let's go ahead and talk very briefly about each of the remaining cards. Up first is the Wax Elemental, a 1-mana 0/2 elemental with Taunt and Divine Shield. So, this one doesn't have attack, so that's a really big deficit for this card. But the fact that it has Taunt and Divine Shield means it might see some play in some sort of token deck, just as that raw body that's annoying and serves as a really good base for buffs. Ultimately, I don't think a card that'll see a lot of play, but does have the slightest glimmer of potential. Up next is the Violet Worm, an 8-mana 7/7 beast with a death rattle that summons 7 1/1 grubs. This is the kind of card that'll be great in Arena, just a big value bomb card in Arena, but in Constructed looks just a little too slow, too hard to use. The 1/1s are pretty susceptible to area of effect as well, so I don't think this card's going to see any play in Constructed format. So now it's the Trog Gloom Eater, a new 5-mana 1/5 taunt with Poisonous. So even though this minion has Poisonous and it theoretically trades into a lot of stuff, 5 health, it's just not enough for a taunted minion, and of course it doesn't apply much pressure if you're attacking with it, so there's no real deck that would want to utilize this outside of maybe some shenanigans with things like Meat Wagon or Master Oakheart. Besides that, this card looks completely unplayable, not something you'd make room for in your deck. So now it's the Toothy Chest, a new 3-mana 0/4 that at the start of your turn sets this minion's attack to a 4, so this is essentially Validated Doomsayer, but the little brother of Validated Doomsayer. Problem with those kinds of cards is they just die for free on your opponent's turn. They get to trade into them with full immunity because there's no attack, making this way too slow. And even on the upside, if it does get the 4/4, that's just not that significant of a play at the end of the day either, so a completely unplayable card. Up next is the Stoneskin Basilisk, a new 3-mana 1/1 beast with Divine Shield and Poisonous. I don't think this is the kind of card that ever sees play in an actual deck. It just doesn't do enough for 3 mana. There are other 3-mana minions that are poisonous that have more attack value, set up better bodies for things like Hunter. But the fact that this exists for Zombeasts is kind of important. You can get things like charging poisonous minions to get to go 2-for-1 with Stoneskin Basilisk because of that Divine Shield, allowing them to trade multiple times. So this card is important that it's in the set, just not one that's going to see much play. And now we have the Sneaky Devil, another neutral demon, something that's still fairly rare. This is a 4-mana 2/2 stealth, and it reads your other minions have +1 attack. The problem with this sort of card is that it's still very susceptible to AoE removal despite the fact that it has stealth, so it's not something that you can trust on lingering around forever, and you're spending quite a bit of mana here on a conditional effect that only works if you already have a board. So it's something that's just really hard to work with and can fail pretty often, making it far too risky to be played. So up next is the Shroom Brewer, a new 4-mana 4/4 with Battlecry that restores 4 health. This is basically the older brother of Earthen Ring Farseer. And, this card does some cool things. Restoring health is nice. Having just a neutral heal, something in the vein of, for instance, Refreshment Vendor is pretty good. Similar kind of stat total allocation. 4/4 is fine for 4. There's no downside like there was with Refreshment Vendor. So I think this card could actually see play in some defensive decks. It's not going to be something you see all the time, but still a mildly viable card. So up next I have the Shrieking Shroom, a new 3-mana 1/2 minion that reads at the end of your turn summon a random 1-cost minion. I wouldn't actually overlook this card. This has some potential. There are some broken 1-drops in Hearthstone. Things like Mana Worm and Northshire Cleric, for instance, are really good. Anytime you get a 1/3 minion out of this, it's a fairly wide board for 3 mana, a couple somewhat significant things, and if this card does linger around, it just continues to generate value. So I doubt this really makes the cut in a token-style deck, but it fits that sort of mentality, and it might. There could be a home where this works, so just keep an eye on this one. I don't think it's great, but this might just be a playable card at the end of the day. And now I have a new mage spell, the Shifting Scroll. I absolutely hate this card because it's yet another random effect for mages they don't need. That said, I do think this is good. It's the kind of thing you can just run in your deck as the ultimate flex sort of card, and occasionally it's going to line up as the ultimate tool. It's just going to give you that ice block sometimes when it's, you don't have an ice block up, and there's free ice block for 3 mana. Other times it's going to line up perfectly for Flame Strike. So this one, I think, will see some play in certain mage decks just because of that flexibility and the ability to do something unpredictable and play more cards than you're supposed to, i.e. 4 ice blocks in any given deck. So up next we have the Sewer Crawler, a new 3-mana 1/1 with a battle cry that summons you a 2/3 giant rat. So this is exactly like Razorfin Hunter for total stat allocation. The only significant difference here is that the giant rat is a beast, so there might technically be some beast synergies with this sort of card. It's going to be fine in something like Arena, but this will not see play in Constructed. Razorfin Hunter doesn't see play for a lot of various reasons, and this has all the same problems. So after that we have the Scorpio Mattock, a new 2-mana 1/2 mech, with a battle cry that allows you to destroy a minion with 1 or less attack. So this is yet another clawed creature that instantly destroyed things in the vein of crabs in the past. Unfortunately for this card, though, it's not quite as efficient as a tech card because it doesn't gain any stats. And of course, it's actually a little overcosted if you look at the difference between it and Hungry Crab and Galactic Crawler, for instance. Either higher cost or lower stats, depending on which one you compare it to. Now, of course, 1 attack minion is much more flexible, but just not enough tempo swing. There aren't any crazy valuable 1 attack minions out there. It doesn't work on things like Tar Creeper, for instance, because Tar Creeper, of course, has 3 attacks during your turn. So I don't really see much application for this card right now. So up next, we have the Kobold Monk, a 4-mana 3/6 that reads, your hero can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. And this one's pretty cool, of course, a counter to things, for instance, like Shadow Reaper Anduin trying to kill you. The problem, of course, is that they can just kill the Kobold Monk. It only has 3 attacks, for instance, so it's fairly susceptible. The good part about this card, though, is that 3/6 in stats isn't terrible for a 4-drop. That's actually fairly well statted. So this is the kind of thing that, depending on the meta, depending on the deck, depending on the shenanigan, it might just be playable. I don't think it's fundamentally good or going to be that important or impactful, but this is a card you can keep your eye on. So up next is the Hooked Reaver, a new Warlock minion, a 4-mana 4/4 demon, with a battle cry that reads, if you have 15 or less health, gain +3/+3 and Taunt. So then it becomes a 4-mana 7/7 with Taunt. And I like this card. It has some upside, of course. Warlock does a lot of damage to themselves, and getting a 4-mana 7/7 Taunt's a really big body that can certainly help stall out aggro very efficiently, particularly in combination with other cards, which you'll be able to do because this one's so cheap. By the time you get to turn 7 or 8 or those sorts of turns, you can play a removal card and play a Hooked Reaver to really help stabilize your health total. You can even use this in a more aggressive deck, I think, just if you're tapping a lot. Eventually, you're going to tap into things and want to have big bodies to play. So I think this card has dual utility, and it looks to me like a pretty solid card. So now let's move on to Healing Rain, a new 3-mana spell for Shaman. It restores 12 health, divided randomly among all friendly characters. And I like this card. This is a really solid big heal for Shaman. Often you might just cast this when you're the only friendly character available to be healed, and then it's just a guaranteed 12 health. Other times you might have damaged things on board. You're looking to give a little life to them, a little life to your hero, and guess what? Healing Rain will meet that need. So it's somewhat flexible in that regard. Any control Shaman deck that's looking for some survivability could run this card. Healing Wave and those sorts of cards have been run in the past. So I think Healing Rain has all the potential in the world to be played. Up next is the Green Jelly, another ooze, a 5-mana 3/3 ooze this time around. And at the end of your turn, guess what? It summons another ooze, and this time the ooze has Taunt. The problem, of course, with a 1/2 ooze with Taunt is that that's just not that much of an impact on the board. Your opponent can push through that pretty easily with lots of small things. And then you're left with just a 3/3 minion. Yes, in total you get 4, 5 in stats, which some of it is taunted, and there is potential for it to do more at the end of the turn if it lives, but this is not the kind of thing that lives often because it does only have 3 health. So I think this is a pretty awkward card that won't really do much to the board and won't serve as the defensive tool that it could be. So ultimately a card that won't be played. Moving on to the Gravel Snout Knight. This is a new 1-mana 2/3 with a battle cry that reads, summon a random 1-cost minion for your opponent. So this is in the vein of things like Zombie Chow, a 2/3 minion for 1 that does something advantageous for your opponent. The problem with the Gravel Snout Knight is that 1-drops are sometimes really powerful, and this minion's just not worth that risk. You can give your opponent some pretty cool stuff for 1 mana, even if it's just something like Crystalline Oracle that draws them a card, or Mana Worms that can snowball out of control. The advantage of these 1-mana 2/3s is that they gave you board advantage at the downside of like health, so they were great in control decks. That's less good, of course, when you're not gaining that much board advantage, so I don't think Gravel Snout Knight is going to work like those other cards did. I also don't think it's a great base for like token decks either, because it just gives your opponent something to utilize and trade back into your token cards. So to me, Gravel Snout Knight does not look playable. So let's move on to the Gilded Gargoyle next, and a Priest minion, a 3-mana 2/2 with the Death Rattle that reads, add a coin to your hand. And this is an okay little card. Clearly, it's really like a 2-mana 2/2 in some ways because the coin essentially negates one of those mana points in the future, so you trade a little now for some upside later. And Priest in particular has interesting ways to use coins with things like Lyra and Priest of the Feast and Shadow Reaper Anduin. So the right kind of deck could certainly find a way to use this coin, particularly if it has other Death Rattle synergies like Quest Priest, for instance. So maybe not the strongest card at the base level, but still something that a deck could probably find a home for one way or another. Up next, I have the Gem Studded Golem, a new 6-mana 5/9 taunt for Warrior that can only attack if you have 5 or more armor. The good news for this card is that you probably don't often care if it can attack when you play this on turn 6. You're just looking for that super defensive taunted minion like Direhorn Matriarch. We've seen it the stat line in the past for Warrior. And this one serves that role. And then if you are ahead in the game and you do need to pressure, you probably have 5 armor if you're winning. And then Gem Studded Golem can help pressure and put out damage and find you the win. So I think this card does a lot of things right. I'm not sure that necessarily every Warrior deck would want to run this, or every Control Warrior might be limited just to a Taunt Warrior kind of deck. But all that said, still a solid card with great stats and a taunt for its cost. So a playable card to me. So now let's move on to the Fungal Enchanter, a new 3-mana 3/3 with a battle cry that restores 2 health to all friendly characters. And this is another sort of cousin to the Earthen Ring Farseer, of which we've seen a couple. But I like this a lot better than Earthen Ring Farseer because it has more potential to heal your board, and that can make a huge impact. Often you have damage minions laying around on any given deck, and this can heal them as well as healing your face for 2. This could theoretically do a ton more healing than Earthen Ring Farseer, and that upside's so valuable. You don't sacrifice any stats. You only sacrifice 1 health to your hero, which shouldn't be that meaningful in the scheme of things. So I think this card has a lot of potential utility, particularly in a class like Priest that synergizes with healing minions already. I think Fungal Enchanter, despite being a neutral common, is going to be a really strong card. So next, let's move on to the Dragon Slayer, another new tech card. This is a 3-mana 4/3 with a battle cry that reads, deal 6 damage to a dragon. So this is pretty much the answer to Cobalt Scalebane, and in fact, even a Prince Keleseth buffed Cobalt Scalebane. And this doesn't have any conditions or anything like that, so it's just a straight-up deal 6, which is pretty insane. It's also very cheap, and it has a great stat line for 3 mana, so this card does a lot of stuff right. I don't necessarily know that everybody wants to run this card, but certainly some tempo decks, if dragons become popular in the meta, are going to be able to utilize this. Even control decks could probably find a home for this card. So all the potential in the world, just depending on what's out there and what becomes dominant. Maybe a little balancing act between this card and other dragons could happen. Certainly a card, though, that has all the potential to make a giant impact on the game. So up next is the Corrosive Sludge, a new 5-mana 5/5 ooze that, very simply, has a battle cry, destroy your opponent's weapon, just like other oozes. The problem for me with Corrosive Sludge is that it's a tweener. It falls right between something like Harrison Jones, the exact same mana cost, with way more upside on its battle cry, drawing 3 cards, and of course a card like Acidic Swamp Ooze or Gluttonous Ooze. So for instance, if you need the card draw, you play Harrison Jones if you want weapon removal. If you just need control, you play Gluttonous Ooze to get armor for weapon removal. Corrosive Sludge to me doesn't do anything that either of those cards don't do better, so I don't think anybody's going to find a reason to run this when you'd rather have the cheap defensive one or the same costed one with all the upside. I don't see this card seeing any play. It doesn't make it bad necessarily just because it's a 5-mana 5/5 with a strong battle cry. A great arena card, for instance, fundamentally solid in that, but in standard format, just won't make the cut. So now let's move on to the Corridor Creeper, a 7-mana 5/5 beast that reads cost 1 less whenever a minion dies while this is in your hand. So clearly it can be nice 0-mana 5/5 beast with things like Unleash the Hounds, for instance. There are some synergies with Corridor Creeper. The problem is you don't really know when you're going to draw it. It's not the kind of thing you necessarily want to keep in your opening hand either, just because you don't know how many minions are going to die. And you have to kill 7 things for this to get down to 0, so really it doesn't make a ton of sense until you probably kill 4, because you want it to have a pretty significant discount before you play it. So it might take a while to make this thing playable, and turn 4, turn 5, playing a 5/5 becomes less impactful. So I think there's really quick diminishing returns on a card like this, which is a big challenge for it. Again, probably something that's great in Arena, but not necessarily a standard constructed card. So now let's move on to the Boisterous Bard, a 3-mana 3/2 with a battle cry that reads, give your other minions +1 health. So this is a bit like Shattered Sun Cleric, except instead of giving 1 minion +1/+1, it buffs an entire board. I do think that some people are sleeping on this card. I saw like a poll result where they gave this basically 1 star, the community did. I don't think it's that bad. I don't think it's a great card, but you could imagine like a token deck or Spreading Plague or something like that getting some actual value out of this card. You're not sacrificing a ton in stats on the minion itself for the potential to buff a lot of things. Even a zoo-style deck, that 1 extra health could go a long way if you do it 3, 4, 5 times. I don't think it's good enough to make the cut in a list like that, all that said, but it's not like a fundamentally awful card. It still does some stuff and makes sense. Another solid arena card, but probably just not good enough in Constructed. So now let's move on to the Crushing Hand, a new Shaman spell. 2 mana, deal 8 damage to a minion with an overload of 3. So this is exactly like a 5 mana Flaming Lance, except of course the mana penalty here is delayed by a turn via overload. So I don't think the normal Shaman wants to run this right. It's just not that great in Constructed. Again, solid arena card. But if you do have an Overload Shaman deck, this one might work as a good single target removal. The real problem for this card, of course, is that Shaman already has great, cheap, efficient single target removal with something like Hex, and in fact it's even better because Hex is also a silence. So I don't know necessarily outside of Overload who would want to run this, but in an Overload deck, hey, maybe this one makes sense because that Overload is so big and can trigger all those Overload effects so much faster. So now let's move on to Bark Skin, a new Druid spell. It's a 1 mana spell that gives a minion +3 health and gives you 3 armor. Now this is just objectively worse in my mind than Earthen Scales. Earthen Scales has the potential to give you so much more armor, and the +1 attack and +1 health is often far more valuable than just +3 health. And the problem for Bark Skin is that it's rotating at the exact same time as Earthen Scales in standard format, so they're always going to be together, and you're always going to have the option to choose Earthen Scales, and I think you always will. So I think this card, although probably not just awful if you look at it in and of itself, is not the kind of thing that's going to see playing Constructed ever. So up next is the Dire Mole, a new 1 mana 1/3 beast with probably the most mysteriously horrifying artwork we've seen yet. And although this may look like a humble, simple card, I actually think this card has some potential to make a huge impact in Hearthstone because it's perfect for Hunter. Hunter needs a highly survivable 1 mana minion to kick things off into Crackling Razor Maw. They've never had it. Most of their 1-drops are very susceptible to removal or early game trades. So I think Dire Mole is the kind of thing that gets played and Constructed. It's a basic card, no text other than Beast. But nonetheless, I think it's going to see some play. Hunter's going to make this one work, and in fact, it might make Hunter considerably better all on its own, which you'd never expect for such a humble card, but hey, watch out. And then up next is the Plated Beetle, a new 2 mana 2/3 beast with a death rattle that reads gain 3 armor. So this is River Crocolisk with some upside. And hey, I think that's fine. 2 mana 2/3s can help contest the board. A little bit of early game healing doesn't hurt too bad either. Particularly if Control Hunter is an archetype that's going to take off. Maybe they could use a card like this for some early game beast synergies, but also just a little bit extra heal and a little bit extra defensive utility to help them get to the late game when they try to do their crazy stuff. I don't think most decks are going to pay attention to this one. It's fine in Arena. Most of the time that 3 armor is not going to make a huge impact at contesting the early board, but hey, it's good enough. It does a little bit of upside compared to its cost, compared to other cards, so perhaps it sees just a little bit of play. And then here I have one last card, the Candle Shot for Hunter, new 1 mana 1/3 weapon that reads immune while attacking. And this card's fine. It's one of those cards that it's there. I don't think it's going to be played a lot. Hunter is better off typically running minions early, but it gives you essentially some free attacks without taking a ton of damage, which again can contribute maybe to that control style. But ultimately, it's not likely going to be worth the spot in your deck list to me, just because it doesn't put out enough real value. There's not that much life gain associated with the early game. The pings don't really do enough to the board. Like cards like Light's Justice, for instance, just don't make the cut. Like, yes, Rogue is happy at hero power because that's not a card in their deck. They don't have to waste a slot in that to achieve that. But with Candle Shot, you would. So it looks fine. Like, it's again going to be a great arena card probably, but I just don't think this one's going to be good enough constructed outside of maybe a no minion deck. Maybe it's something that gets run in that environment to give Hunter a more consistent early game draw and a set of playable cards. But ultimately, I think this one will fall flat. So there you go, guys. That was 27 cards, the detailed reviews this time around. What I'd like to do now is go through and rate each of these cards from 1 to 5 stars. Wax Elemental is a 2-star card. Violet Worm is a 2-star card. Trog Gloom Eater is a 1-star card. Toothy Chest is a 1-star card. Stoneskin Basilisk is a 1-star card. Sneaky Devil is a 1-star card. Shroom Brewer is a 3-star card. Shrieking Shroom is a 2-star card. Shifting Scroll is a 4-star card. Sewer Crawler is a 1-star card. Scorpio Mattock is a 1-star card. Kobolds Monk is a 3-star card. Hooked Reaver is a 4-star card. Healing Rain is a 3-star card. Green Jelly is a 1-star card. Gravel Snout Knight is a 1-star card. Gilded Gargoyle is a 2-star card. Studded Golem is a 3-star card. Fungal Enchanter is a 4-star card. Dragon Slayer is a 4-star card. Corrosive Sludge is a 2-star card. Corridor Creeper is a 2-star card. Boisterous Bard is a 2-star card. Crushing Hand is a 2-star card. Barkskin is a 1-star card. Dire Mole is a 4-star card. Plated Beetle is a 3-star card. And Candleshot is a 2-star card. And there you go, guys. That wraps it up for my Kobolds and Catacombs card reviews. That's 135 cards down. What a set. Some crazy, crazy stuff on the way. Can't wait to play these cards. Share your thoughts in the comments below, guys. Which cards are your favorites? Which ones are the best? Which ones are the worst? I can't wait to hear your take on this final card review. But until then, everybody, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, game on.